more credibility to what John is talking about. And remember, the gospel according to John is a gospel written to Christians. Matthew is written to a Jewish audience, Mark to a Roman audience, Luke to a Gentile audience, but John is primarily to a Christian audience to deepen our faith. All right. Point number 4 in this, the book of Revelation is traditionally believed to have been written by John on nearby Patmos, the island. This apocalyptic text has had a profound impact on Christian eschatology. What about the end times? How are we studying this? What do we know about it? And the understanding of the end times. So, some scholars believe the apostles were in Ephesus during Nero's persecution. While not a consensus, early church historians like Eusebius, got it right there, suggested there was significant persecution of Christians during Nero's reign. The apostles Peter and Paul were martyred in Rome at this time. I believe Peter AD 66, Paul AD 68. Right? John's presence at Ephesus helped to strengthen the early Christian community there. The letters to the 7 churches in Asia in the Revelation were also a source of imminent encouragement. Encouragement for what they were going to face, because Nero's persecution was empire-wide, and it was against Jews, and Christians fell into it also. So, and when we get into the 7 letters themselves, I think we'll see aspects of that. That it's just not a total persecution. Remember, the Great Tribulation was focused on the Jewish nation and on Jerusalem and on the temple. And everything else was on the periphery of that. And Christians were going to feel that. But it wasn't really focused on them. And it's not in any way in the biblical sense. So again, we ask the question, why is John commissioned to write to the 7 churches of Asia? With Jerusalem about to be destroyed and Antioch overwhelmed by the Roman imperial power, Asia would suffer a short period of persecution, but rise to be the physical center of the church for 2 centuries. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? With the proofs, the propositions that I've gone through?
That's pretty much the definition of the tribulation, isn't it? The persecution and all of the Jews during the reorganization, for lack of a better word, from Judaism to Christianity. The turmoil.
I would phrase it a little bit differently. You're correct, but it's not a transition. And the Great Tribulation is the destruction of the Jewish nation as a political entity, the temple and Judaism as a religion, because of their breaking the covenant and their rejection of the Messiah.
The new
But the new covenant, it's,
We're on the same page. It's hard to put
it's
selective,
so technical.
precise words.
Yeah, it seems so technical. We don't want to, I think because of what the millennialists teach down here later, that there'll be a restoration of the Old Testament, a restoration of national Israel, of the temple and Old Testament type Judaism. I don't want to say it's a transition into this period and then there'll be a transition back to that. No, it's a complete stoppage. It's a destruction of the old, and there's not going to be a reestablishment of national Israel in God's scheme of things.
And that national Israel is where they place the 1,000-year reign. So many preach the 1,000-year reign is that transition back to Judaism.
Right. They take it as being literal
Right.
rather than a figurative. His reign is, he reigns now, he'll reign till the end when he comes back, and he'll continue to reign through eternity. They take, no, it's got to be a literal 1,000 years, which the Jews didn't even believe that. The Pharisees didn't even believe that. But that's something for another time.
Right.
Okay? We go back, and if we would study the Pharisees, did the Pharisees believe they were the only people going to heaven? I don't even know that they believed in a heaven, in the sense that people would go to heaven. I think they believed that there would be a resurrection and there would be a judgment. And people who did good would live on the earth eternally. And those who didn't would be taken to Gehenna, to hell for eternity. But the good, whether Jew or Gentile, didn't matter. They lived the rest of eternity on the earth. But there'd only be good.
That's what Jehovah's Witnesses, they want to inherit the earth.
Only for 1,000 years.
Well, that's not what they told me.
No, only for 1,000 years. Then after that, their 1,000 years, the earth is destroyed.
The tribulation, would you say it ended? Well, the destruction of the temple, was that the end or the beginning of the end? That would have been the beginning of the end, wouldn't it?
No, the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem was the end of the Great Tribulation, though the Jews continued to fight for another 70, 80 years before really it was over. But there were just small groups of them.
Okay, one more thing.
And we can go to especially when we get to chapter 6 and into chapter 7 of the book of Revelation, we'll point that out.
Well, being here in the beginning, I think these are points that we need to mutually understand, agree upon, because there's so much to come. The 7 churches, was that the remnants of the 12 tribes? You know, when they separated and we've studied about how they fell apart when they went to their part of the country. Define the 7 churches briefly.
Okay,
The purpose.
let's go back. All right. Remember in our studies of the minor prophets, we talked about how that when Solomon was king, when he died, he had built the temple. When he died, his son Rehoboam continued heavy-handed tactics, and 11 of the 12 tribes separated under Jeroboam, son of Nebat, went their own way. So you had Israel, the northern kingdom, Judah, the southern kingdom. Well, then Benjamin left the north and came back to the south. So those 10 tribes are called the 10 lost tribes. But many of the people of that area came south to live in Judea and Benjamin. The tribes, in a sense, were in rebellion to God. And Jeroboam put the calves, one at Bethel in the southern part, another one at Dan, way up in the northern parts. You worship here. Well, there were still a lot of people who only worshiped Yahweh, but they became an idolatrous nation. So they were taken into captivity, the northern part, in about 721 BC. When Assyria took them out, they put them in one place over in like Assyria, one place, and moved other people in there. Well, the people that came in there believed that in national gods. So they believed that the God of that country, they should also worship the God of that country. So they had that polluted worship that even occurred clear down to the time of the Samaritans that Jesus was dealing with. They only held to the first 5 books of Moses. But many of those people had moved to the south. Okay, so when the south is destroyed, Judea is destroyed in 586 BC completely by the Babylonians. When they are allowed to come back, they come back as Judah. But remnants of all those tribes, all 10 tribes, come back. And you see that in the names of people. Following me? So, Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus is the Persian king, emperor. He allows them to come back, but the Jews are allowed to come back. But most of them come back to around Jerusalem, but they are from all 12 tribes. So the term 10 lost tribes of Israel only basically refer to the loss of the kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, and not necessarily to the people. Now, in like Mormon theology, they believe that the 10 lost tribes went and kind of went east until they got around and ended up in our west, and somehow Christ came to them. But that's all supposition. Okay? But does that help to explain?
Well, and that's what I was talking about, the falling apart of their structure was the country was gone, but the people
There was a remnant of
integrated, mixed, whatever word you want to use, and came back. And that was, at what point were the 7 churches established by those who had come back?
Okay.
Is that a,
No. Okay, remember in our studies,
yeah,
okay, when we studied about, especially through Daniel,
right,
right? When those Jews were moved out of the northern kingdom, and then when Nebuchadnezzar took Jerusalem and moved them to Babylon, he placed them all over his kingdom. Well, where the Jews settled, they developed synagogues.
right,
When the Jews came back, at the time of Cyrus then, Persian, he let everybody worship the way they wanted to. Only a remnant of the Jews came back. So many of the Jews remained over in the east, and I'm doing it backwards. East would be over here for you. Many of them remained over there in those synagogues. And they worshiped God according to the law of Moses, but without the temple. Some of them probably made pilgrimages to the temple, but those synagogues existed for quite a number of years, for 500 years. And they interacted with the people like the wise men. Okay? So, when Jesus comes, and what we taught about begins in Jerusalem, then the persecuted go up to Antioch. Antioch takes the gospel to the world. They send Paul and Barnabas, and it's on the second missionary journey that when Paul goes with Silas, that he goes up through Asia and he establishes some of these churches in that area. But where does he go to when he first goes into those towns?
to the synagogue.
He goes into those synagogues where it was Jews who had been exiled, didn't go back, and you're talking 500 years later.
They're spoken of as the scattered.
Yeah, the dispersed. So he goes to them first. And when he gets persecuted, then he goes to the Gentiles. So from, we'll say 40 to 60, there are more Gentiles in the churches over there than there are Jews. Churches of Christ. Okay?
Right.
So that's where they established. Does that help to get it kind of in focus for
Yes,
you?
and that's,
All those towns.
that's all part of our past studies. Pretty much recent past, 2 or 3 years. But like, what were they called? Was the church at Antioch? They really weren't. The way we're talking about it, it doesn't specify that church at Ephesus. Or the church, there was synagogue in Rome, even.
Yeah.
That before they ran them all out and then let them come back. As we talk about the 7 churches of Asia, it seems like we're talking about an open-ended scattering of believers across the Mediterranean. You got the church in Borga, the church in Stinnett, the church in Amarillo. Can we say that about these 7 churches?
Yeah. And that's what I was talking about in that picture. You got 7 independent congregations.
Where were they?
ESPTSPL. The 7 churches. Ephesus,
Around
Smyrna,
Okay,
Pergamum, Thyatira,
right.
Sardis,
That's that big loop he made.
Philadelphia,
Yeah.
Laodicea.
Yeah, okay,
And they may not be totally in order there. Well, it goes
yeah,
like that.
okay,
And Colossae's down here,
right.
and then back up to Ephesus. But
That answered my question. That's the connection
gonna get
I
it.
wasn't making, was that missionary journey that he made kind of across the bay from Italy. What big Asia, yeah, okay,
this is one that's afterward. We're going to do a little more study on this. This is one that's afterward. And let me go back here. Because we
There you go.
had done this the other
Yeah.
day. And so, yeah, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamon, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, and Colossae isn't one of these, but Colossae, where the book of Colossians is written to, is down in this area. Look at that.
right. Okay,
And over here's Patmos.
I wasn't,
But there were synagogues in all these
Right.
cities. Paul,
I just, in my mind, I wasn't making that connection with this, which we've studied so much, over time, even on Wednesday night. We spent quite a bit of time on this, but I was just having a hard time connecting this and what we were talking about.
Yeah.
I'm good,
yeah, Corinth is over here.
right,
But Ephesus is far enough away from Jerusalem. Jerusalem would be on this map
right, yeah,
down here. Antioch would be like here. Ephesus is far away. Now, this area is still under Roman control,
right.
and they're kind of faithful to the emperor. And there's going to be some persecution there, but not the intense because of the first Jewish war down there. It's just not going to be.
In our studies, it seemed to me like, Italy's Rome's over here to the west. But we talked pretty extensively about over here in Judea, on the eastern edges of the Mediterranean. Rome kind of like let the Jews do what they wanted to, as long as they were civil and there wasn't a bunch of uprising and things like this. But it seemed like the closer you moved to the west towards Rome, getting to this area, Rome's presence was greater than it was. They said, by law, we'll recognize the Jews. Now y'all go over there and behave yourself. But
And
the
don't-
closer you move back to Rome, the more influence that the Roman Empire put on, the influence was greater of the empire the closer you moved to Rome, where they ruled. But you get way over there on the Western Mediterranean, that was kind of a ho-hum. They seem to be taking care of themselves, you know. We'll just let them do, as long as they don't cause a big ruckus. And that was something I had never realized until our studies here Wednesday nights when we went through all of that. Okay, I'm good.
Well, the Jews could, to a degree, rule themselves. For Rome, there were two important things. Number one, that they could even live in Rome, no problem, because they wanted to do business with the Jews. The Jews wanted to do business with Rome. Two things. Number one, you cannot openly proselytize. I hope that's pronounced. They couldn't go out and preach and make converts openly. They could kind of behind the scenes.
Evangelize.
They couldn't evangelize openly, but evangelize is typically a Christian word, though. Okay? Secondly, as long as they recognized Caesar as king, it was all right. Well, they could have Herod as king as long as they recognized Herod's authority came from.
Right.
So if there was some other king, why was Jesus crucified? The Jews said, blasphemy. Well, what did Pilate say? I said, that's your law. I see nothing wrong with that. He's making himself gods. Well, he's making himself a king, and if you let him get away with that, you're no friend of Caesar. So what did Pilate then end up saying to Rome why he had allowed him to be crucified? He made himself a king. What did he have written on the title? This is Jesus, King of the Jews, in 3 languages. You make yourself a king, and Caesar didn't appoint you, here's what happens to you. See the total difference? Yeah, the Jews could exist as a legal religion if they didn't mind saying, Caesar's king. And what did the chief priests, what were they claiming? Pilate says, behold your king. We have no king but Caesar. How God must have felt when they said that.
That was one of those sentences that he wished he could put back in his mouth.
Okay, where did we get to? We got to the end, we got to there, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
So, yep, got where I wanted to. All right.
There's just so much to come in this study. I just wanted to make sure I was on the same page, and you know, if we don't get this down pat, the rest is futile.
That is why I have gone to the extent I have in the historical aspect of it and pulling this stuff up, because I think so many people have missed it. Just the Great Tribulation. And we're going to go a little bit deeper, shall we say, historically, starting next week. The Great Tribulation prophesied by Jesus occurred in the reigns of Nero and Vespasian. We're going to look at some of these things and what was Nero thinking? What was his problem? And You know, well, why should we look at that? If we can't nail that down to that time period, we allow them to put it out there in the future somewhere, they'll mess up. They'll mess up. And
And Fred, you've done
We wanna
a
be-
wonderful job putting this in that context. My problem has always been, never studied Revelations to an extent like this. Everybody just kind of mentions it and then goes, I don't want to get into that, you know. And,
well,
thank you.
we get a lot of it too, okay? Teacher doesn't know what they're really teaching. For the most part. So they start the book of Revelation, read a couple passages, a couple verses, whatever. What do you think that means? What do you think that means? Well, I think it means this. Okay, what's the next? And you know, if I'm going to study it, I'm going to study it. If I'm going to teach it, I'm going to study it, and I'm going to study it deep. And I want to know what was going on. And listen, there may be a lot of things that I miss. And yeah, you won't believe the amount of material that you got to cull it out. We could be here forever. You got to cull and hit these points that make it. And I'm not saying, you know, well, I'm just cherry picking the points that make my point. No,
Well,
that's
people,
not the
people
case.
seem to concentrate on the tribulation rapture ruling for 1,000 years, and there's only 144,000 people going to heaven.
Well, that's Jehovah's Witnesses
You
there.
know, that's kind of the breadth of what people look at in Revelations, other than I'm the beginning and the end. Don't add to or take away from the Word of God. And much past that, there's, I think we have failed miserably over time to, I don't
I
know
think so, too.
why we're afraid of some parts of the gospel.
I don't think it's that we're afraid of it. I told you before, when I was very young and not going to church, yeah, there were things that were scary about it because it can be scary. I don't think it's that we're afraid of it. I think it's because it's in that apocalyptic language to begin with, and we don't want to take the time to look at the historical aspect of it. When we have people that don't want to deal with history to begin with. That's past. That's past. Don't worry about the past. We are products of the past.
Exactly. That's why we're here today.
And the Bible especially is a historical record coming up to that time. That's why I put that Venn diagram on there. But, oh, is there something in the book of Revelation about what's going to happen perhaps in our time? Well, yeah, Jesus could come back at any time. But there are things written to conclude what God was doing from that Old Testament era. And we'll leave that for when we open up the seals.
Thank you, Fred.
You're quite welcome.